you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Welcome to Visiting the Village. We're back. I'm Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and joining me as ever is the philoprogenitive Ian Hardingham.
Hello. I have 2 children now, not including this podcast.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's the top story.
No Man's Sky has come out, to some acclaim and some controversy. My question for you is, are Hello Games to blame for the backlash against its hype, and does it matter?
I'm not annoyed about the hype about No Man's Sky, and in terms of the features they promised, I don't feel like they were hugely egregiously under delivering on what they promised. This multiplayer thing is the thing that everyone's getting very agitated about, because it's something that you can point to that they really did heavily sort of explicitly say was going to be there that hasn't been there. There's this amazing thing where multiplayer functionality is promised on the boxes of European copies of this game, real life boxed copies, but then covered up with a sticker, which is great. I happen to think that, and this is not the most earth-shatteringly inspired take ever, people are taking out their frustration that this hasn't ended up being the Citizen Kane of games out in a way that they think is sort of objectively right. They can find something that Hello Games has done objectively wrong, and they can talk about that instead of talking about just a vague sense of disappointment.
I think that's definitely true. I think there are a few different categories of things going on here. One of them is a completely legitimate category that happens to pretty much every game developer, where you get interviewed about a game at an early stage and you start saying that features which are fairly clearly up for grabs are definitely going to be in the game. I don't know a single game developer who hasn't done that. It is annoying, and it does look like lying, but the nature of game development and the nature of the game's medium means that it is inevitable. There is no developer who has not done that at some point, and unfortunately, it's something that the audience for games just has to get used to and put up with. So there's that category of things. Then there's a category of things which I think they should have known were up for grabs and didn't put lots of disclaimers around. For example, big fleet combat. That's a feature which you can look at and go, yeah, we might end up having to cut that. So you can say, at the moment, you can do this fleet combat. That's a perfectly fine disclaimer, and I noticed that Sean Murray has done that with some other features that people are complaining about. When a dev says, at the moment, you can do X, that does not mean that it's going to be in the final game, and they should have used that more. I think the final category of things is actually genuinely really bad and comes from their design process. So one of those things I would say is the ability to play the game without visiting planets. And that's a really, really big deal. I think that's a bigger deal than multiplayer, because it really defines, the availability of different play styles within the game, which is a very important decision when you think about buying a game. So them saying kind of over and over again, you'll be able to play the game just by trading. And that apparently, I haven't played enough of the game myself to verify this, but apparently that's literally impossible. I do think that's really bad.
Yeah, I guess that does sound quite bad. Both that and the multiplayer, I suppose, are in the most egregious category for this particular game. It doesn't get me very animated. I happen to think that focusing on this is a bit like convicting Al Capone of his insurance fraud or whatever it was, not paying his taxes, when people should be talking about the design of the game. We're not going to get into it too deeply. I think No Man's Sky is a really interesting game. I think everyone should play it. Lots of people are really enjoying it. Lots of people, like myself, find some aspects of it a bit too frustrating. I really think that all of the discussion about this game should be about the design aspects. Of course, I'm going to say that. I'm a designer. There were so many interesting directions this game could go in, went in one of those directions. And I really think that all of the meat on the bones of talking about this game is all to do with that, and not really to do with how they promise stuff. When the hype machine, the PR for a game goes so overboard as it has done on No Man's Sky, which happens when a concept really hits with a huge number of people, which clearly happened with this game, it just gets out of control. People start pinning their own desires onto the game, whether or not the developers have said anything like that thing. You get some people who are sort of making death threats on Twitter before they ever played the game because they are certain it's going to be the perfect game. It all just gets a bit out of control. I mean, I think that it would be nice if we didn't live in a post-truth world, talk about the craziness that people are saying about politicians right now. But we do, and getting too animated about how hype oversells stuff is missing the point, really. I think people like getting excited for things. People like exciting things on the horizons. Obviously, when a developer gets a lot of attention, you want to make the game sound like the most exciting thing ever, and that's just a bit natural. It's not a thing that I'm at all sort of interested in trying to change.
Do you think that it matters if a developer lies knowingly about features that are definitely going to be in a game?
I think as long as the developer at that point believes the feature is going to be in the game, then it's basically okay. I mean, we're all quite naive when it comes to the features that end up being in a game. It's just that I know that being in an interview, you want to show the world your vision for the game and how great it is, and that includes talking about features which are currently on your mind, which may end up not being there. It's not great. I just don't know if there's much of an alternative. If you only talk about the features that are currently in the game, previews can be a bit boring. And, you know, we talk about this with Kickstarter, how Kickstarter locks you into features, and sometimes the best thing to do is to not do a feature that you were pretty sure you wanted to put in. Yeah. So I don't want to hold people to whatever they say, because sometimes it's not the right thing to put in. I mean, I really think people are sort of transferring their frustration at other elements into this. You know, it's fine to be annoyed about this being presented to everyone, and especially non-gamers. It's this amazing thing, and if you're a core gamer, you have to walk down the street or go to your mum's house, and she's telling you how great No Man's Sky is, and you're like, well, hold on a minute. Actually, this sort of got out of hand, and this isn't sort of quite as good as people were saying. That's frustrating. I'm just not particularly sure this is Sean Murray's fault. I'm glad they managed to get a lot of attention for this game. Certainly plenty of No Man's Sky is authentic and real enough to deserve this. And I'm just so glad it's this game that's been the second most successful PlayStation 4 launch ever, and not Call of Duty.
So, I mean, I take all of those points, and obviously, you know, you will have a design focus. From my focus, which is more PR oriented, the parts of it which are fault is a difficult word, but I think that he is responsible for, do really interest me, because you've definitely seen a different approach from them. So this is a first-party Sony title, so it's a small developer who have been thrown into the kind of PR arena that is frequented normally by AAA devs. And there's normally sort of two responses to that if you're an indie. One is to kind of play up your accessibility and friendliness and just sort of do all the interviews in a nice way. And the other is to just be very enigmatic and not say anything and not really do that stuff. So they've kind of opted for the former, you know, the accessible dev who's willing to go on shows and talk about the game. And in that situation, you're going to be put under an enormous amount of pressure to make emphatic statements. I've certainly done interviews which entirely consisted of questions like, what can you do here? Can you do this? Can you do that? Literally that and nothing else. And that can blindside you. But it's such a known thing, the extent to which you should be prepared for that, and that you should be prepared to kind of manage your message correctly in the context of that, I think is difficult. And this is an exceptionally difficult game to do that with. So looking at what they could have done better in terms of message is interesting to me, because it's such a huge challenge.
Yeah, I just completely agree. I'm not sure I've got much else to say about it. Trying to market your game, you know, the first difficult thing is getting the attention. And that is so much more important than, you know, what you do with it once you've got the attention, basically. Yeah. I think people need to be aware of the ethics, and they need to have a very clear vision for their game at the point they start talking about it. And from there, I'm going to give people a bit of benefit of the doubt if they promise a feature that doesn't get in.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I mean, in terms of the design of the game, I think it's really clear to both of us that the design of the game wasn't there from the outset. And I think some of these problems, like this, you know, the trading thing, which I which I do find quite significant. It's not like sort of if you removed one of the features from, say, a Bethesda game, like if you didn't have magic or if you didn't, it's sort of not like that. It kind of defines what the game is. And they did start to lean on that quite a lot in the sort of middle period of discussing the game. I feel like all of these things came out of not gameplay prototyping early, which is our constant mantra.
Yeah, definitely. My core frustration with this game is that it feels like they fit the gameplay around the concept rather than the other way around. And that, I mean, to be honest, given how badly that usually goes, this turned out okay.
Yes.
It really is a pretty straightforward and basic resources survival type game. It takes sort of the median of a bunch of different popular games and relies on that. And that's okay. I just get frustrated because I can think of sort of 1,000 really exciting directions that would have made this a game that I would have remembered forever and ever. And I do think that in my process of maturing as a designer, the one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to go down the path of trying to imagine what people want out of a game and designing mechanics based on that, and not listening to your own instincts. I've put plenty of features into FS2 that I thought sounded cool, and then you start playing it and it just doesn't work. It doesn't fit in, and you have to be ready to take that out straight away.
Yes.
And you can't say, well, XCOM has permanent death of your units, and I love that so much that that's got to be in the game. That's either part of your very initial sort of strong prototype and concept, or it's something that you've got to be willing to leave behind. And great new genres are made when people are willing to just go down whatever path the game takes you and not spend your time thinking about what consumers currently want, basically.
Given that is the approach you've just described generally produces better games, as in games that are well designed, does it bother you that this is still enormously successful despite having been designed in the wrong way?
I actually find myself not being bothered at all by how successful this game has been, because enough of it is authentic for me. Like the visual design is amazing.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that you can do in the game is great. You know, this is not Spore, where I was sort of so offended by having a couple of weird mini games before you got to the full game, and various different aspects of that. I'm not sort of actively offended by this, and we also kind of really like Halo games, and this is a game that I think a lot of indies would love to make it slightly differently, but it's a game we'd love to make. So no, I'm actually relieved that reviewers have had the confidence to raise all of these issues. I haven't really read a single review that hasn't reflected these problems that I have. A lot of them say, well, I could get past it, or I'm just the kind of person for whom this clicks for anyway. But they've all talked about these issues, so I don't think this is an overrated game in terms of the press at all. So I just think, I'm just sort of corely frustrated and sort of slightly sad that I think, well, let's put it this way. I desperately hope they make a sequel. And with the sequel, I desperately hope that they have the confidence to do something really original and what they think is fun to play, not what they think other people think is fun to play. And I don't want them to spend ages messing around adding base building to No Man's Sky. I think that's a real waste of time. I want them to take 3 months off and then make No Man's Sky. And I want that to be one of my favourite games of all time.
I think there's a couple of interesting things here to me. This really proves, this idea of not designing to what people want. It sort of proves to me that you can just do that, and it doesn't matter if the concept and visuals of the game are good enough. As in, the level of design and coherence in this game does not matter to its success. The reviews, which have kind of ranged around, haven't been sort of exclusively amazing. It really, really doesn't matter. Everything was cemented by the visuals and by the hype and by the concept. So that
in
really
the case where you get a concept that hits this thoroughly, I would agree. I mean, they've not effed it up, and that is important. If this game had been released and there was something terribly wrong with it, it would have had an impact on sales. I think it would have had the thing where the sales on day 1 wouldn't have been much worse, but the sales on day 7 would have been much worse.
Yeah.
So I think it's totally important that they got it's decent gameplay. I really hesitate to take any broader lessons from that. Only, I would say, a relatively small percentage of games manage to take a properly individual approach to design, end up finishing the game, and end up being good, because you can go down the path that the game takes you as a designer, and that can just end up being bad. Or it can just end up being so far away from your original concept that it's no longer appropriate. So it's not by any means something that is 100% guaranteed, but we talk about this a lot when it comes to sequels and Kickstarters. I think a lot of the games that we love most are games that were willing to forge ahead on their own, and certainly not... I think a designer needs to be able to authentically experience the game as himself. If he starts getting detached from what is rewarding, what is exciting, what is boring about the game, because he's trying to emulate what other consumers want or what's happening in the industry right now, I think that's where things become middle of the road, like where you get 2 and 3 star games. Not terrible games, but also not amazing games.
The other thing that is interesting to me is that I really like this game, having played probably half an hour of it. The first half an hour, which a lot of people have said is bad and kind of made them feel horrified, I really liked, and I don't like survival games. So I think what they may have done is sort of slightly Blizzardified the survival genre, so that it's kind of immediately obvious what to do with everything.
Well, come back
like
after
that.
3 hours. I think that my real frustration started to kick in certainly after the half-hour mark, when I started to be stopped from exploring and having a good time by some really very basic collecting mechanics, I guess.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's intriguing to me. Yes, I do want to play up to that point, but I was not expecting to like this game, actually, from sort of very early on. I mean, I like the aesthetic, but the sort of vagueness of it, and the fact that I knew there were going to be all these different systems. The space combat isn't the flavor of space combat I like, so I was expecting not to like it, and I really did. I found it very compelling in the early stage. I liked being forced.
I mean,
to
I do think it's helpful that you've had your expectations tempered before you played it.
Yeah.
I think that really, really helps. If you start out with the possibility that this game is amazing, I think the first thing you and everyone else feels is disappointment. But as a game that's been put in the mental box of intriguing indie game, not all-time great, there's so much to like about it.
So this sort of, I think it's good and interesting to be critical of these things, and we have been, but I think there's a lot to like about it, and obviously it's a huge achievement for them to ship it. So I continue to be really interested by their work. I think you're right that the next thing that I'd like to see from them is a bit of a unification of this very tight, great, elegant design they achieved in Joe Danger, and the scope and ambition that they found in this. And I feel like, obviously, this being a massive success, what they do now is going to be super interesting and could be very innovative.
Absolutely.
Cool. CSGO Lounge has informed visitors it is applying for gambling licenses. Is skin gambling here to stay?
I actually think the answer to this is no, and I'm going to tell you why. I think that the online games companies have enough control over their games and enough desire to control their games that with features like this that become very popular in the sort of the third-party website space, what ends up happening is the games development company either legitimizes it internally and brings it in internally, or it finds a way of completely banning it. And I think that one of those two things is going to happen with the really big ones of these games. I think it's going to be banning it, because I think that skin gambling is kind of what these developers want to happen within the game. The only question is, can they find a way of exerting their will? And I think they can. I think they've got enough control over how you trade items, how you make items available to other people, that they have the ability, and I think that they will use that ability.
You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of gold farming, because
Yes.
gold farming is the original meta industry of these multiplayer games. It's always been illegitimate and terms of service breaking. And companies have tried to bring it on side. Blizzard tried to do that in Diablo with the auction house. They tried to put all of the transactions around that kind of behavior inside the game, and it did not work. So I think what you said is precisely right. They either have to try and bring it in-house, which I don't think they will. I don't think Valve want to do that. Or they have to shut it down. And I feel like they have a fairly good history of being able to shut stuff down, and that poses a major threat to this. But I think with games in future, you're just going to see what you did see with gold farming, where it just pops up again in a very insistent form. And some of the people who are good at running these businesses, these sort of grey businesses, will be around in the shadows forever.
Yeah, I think though it is important to look at the specifics. Gold farming, difficult to stop because it involves you just giving your account details to someone. That's extremely difficult for the developers to have anything to do with. If you're actually performing this sort of grey black market service by logging into someone's account, that's a whole different level of difficult to stop. If something is relying on being able to trade through the Steam item service, I think that's a different matter, basically. So yeah, I know that it's always dangerous to get too specific here because people can always find ways around stuff, or in general. But I think that there are versions of these which are very difficult to stop and versions which are not. So certainly my call is that skin gambling is not going to manage to find a way around the cops like gold farming has.
Sure, I think that makes a lot of sense. What will be interesting is if they are granted these licenses and then they mount a legal challenge to be able to stay in business as a legitimate gambling thing, or conversely, they get sued by Valve and that's fought in a court somewhere, which I think could very well happen. That this is a case where both parties have a lot of money and it really don't have any sort of mutual benefit for each other. They both want to see each other back off.
That's true. Case law in the States, wow, I'm putting on my legal hat, tends to show that companies who run a sport or a game, like, for instance, Valve in the case of CSGO, have a very large ability to be able to show that external gambling damages their product.
Yeah.
There's been an awful lot of case law which shows that they've been able to persuade the courts that this undermines faith in the competitors of the game and damages their attractiveness to families, which are two really compelling arguments which should probably mean that they'd have a good chance of winning in court.
Yeah, no, I can definitely back that up, and you're right. Given the controversy of gambling in the US, it doesn't seem good for these sites. We haven't talked about the Nintendo NX since this proper announcement. Pure visiting the village fodder abandoned for your frivolous endeavour of producing human beings. IGN are reporting on some details of its modular controller, NX or NO.
NX or NES or whatever. An appropriate pun is here. As regular listeners know, I'm very excited to find out what this ends up being, and this lands firmly in the sane territory of Nintendo's possibility space. So for those who don't know, it looks like the Nintendo NX is going to be a legitimately portable handheld console. It can plug into your TV, big whoop, but the most important aspect is that the controller element of the Nintendo NX handheld has two different bits. If you imagine, say, a Vita, it's got the left-hand thing with the analog stick and the D-pad and the right-hand thing with the buttons. And you can actually detach both of those to become two controllers. So, for instance, two small children could play whatever latest farce of the game Mario is starring in on the TV or something. I don't really care about any of that. I really love handheld consoles. I'm going to buy this on day of release, even though I don't particularly like most of the things Nintendo does aesthetically nowadays. So I'm really pleased it's this and not some TV machine.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I'm happy it's a handheld. That's going to be cool. This modular controller thing, I don't know about that actually. I mean, I guess it means that you'll be able to sort of use good controllers as the default thing. There's this very annoying thing with the Wii U where you can't use a wired Pro controller. That sort of doesn't exist. You have to use wireless, which is irritating in some situations. So with this, it feels like you'll be able to clip in controller elements which suit the game you're playing more, and I guess that's good, but there's only a few controller elements that anyone wants to use anyway, so I do wonder about the necessity of that.
Yeah, it sounds pretty gimmicky. On the other hand, I think Nintendo love selling games that come with a hardware thing as well.
Yeah.
And Nintendo fans are going to buy the hell out of Zelda that comes with a customized controller section. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be functional, it can be purely aesthetic. They are going to buy the hell out of that.
Yeah.
And that's going to be awesome. And I'm kind of sort of very mildly into that, because I one of my favourite sort of things that I would collect if I had the time are all of the different things you could plug into console cartridge slots. For instance, Micro Machines 2 came with extra controller ports on its cartridge.
Indeed.
Nintendo DD had like a video capture unit. And, remembering such cool things as the Dreamcast virtual memory thing that you plugged into the controller. These things are really fun. Nintendo knows how to market these things. That aspect of it is just sort of pure fan fodder for me. I really wish Nintendo would make games that I liked more. Nowadays, I don't like their design directions, but that's just me. But I'm still going to buy this.
Yeah, the novelty controller per game thing isn't something I particularly thought about with this, but you're absolutely right. If you get a nice, like, I don't know, Zelda logo button that you press and then Link turns into a cat, that's got to be
exactly
good. It's got to be good for the fans, doesn't it? So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think you've convinced me. Actually, I think you've kind of swayed me that that this is going to be pretty interesting. A handheld in the current climate is a counterintuitive choice, but Nintendo are good at winning with counterintuitive choices. And, if you're thinking about Christmas market sort of stuff, and you're looking for presents for kids, this could be a really big success in that market. And that's kind of what Nintendo do now.
The question that I have, sort of like a sort of a more inside baseball question is this the next 3DS or not? Because if it's not, that's kind of weird, Nintendo having two sort of, in inverted commas, current gen handhelds at the same time.
Yeah.
That seems weird, but on the other hand, that's kind of what I've been hearing.
Okay.
So I'll follow that with interest. I mean, I really can't overstate how much I wish everything was a handheld console. I love handheld consoles. It's just the way that I want to play games in my current life. So I'm basically willing to hitch my wagon to any console manufacturer who's going to make one, and this is cool. It doesn't, to me, this doesn't feel bogged down by the gimmickry in the way that the Wii U certainly was.
Yeah.
So I'm on board.
The final thing to say is that some of the other pictures we saw of this, it looked very wide. And playing on a big tablet with controllers like the Wii U tablet is not good. And it feels heavy and feels annoying. So that's my concern here. My concern is that they're still going for this hybrid thing. If it was really designed, like the Vita, to feel nice in your hands, if it looks a bit boxy, that's my concern, like that it's not going to be a nice handheld because it's kind of compromising to try and be this sort of...
Yeah, Nintendo kind of flew the flag for ergonomics for quite a long time and then just seemed to completely get away from that. I mean, the original 3DS was very heavy, very annoying to hold. The Wii U is, I find the Wii U gamepad a laughable thing to try and do anything with.
Yeah.
So I certainly don't have a huge amount of faith they're not going to screw that up. But I guess I'm sort of optimistic about it. I wonder how big it can be. I mean, they must have an understanding that this is a thing that you play on the bus. So the 3DS XL or whatever it's called is sort of getting there in some directions, but it still kind of completely loses to the Vita on ergonomics.
Yeah.
I don't see why they need to lose the ergonomics battle. Even if they're going to make this stuff that looks very accessible, looks like it's made of Fisher-Price plastic, that's kind of fine. But you could still put some curves in there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not like that's particularly difficult to achieve with sort of current knowledge. Anyway, yes, we watch with interest. Researchers at NYU Polytechnic School of Engineering's Game Innovation Lab have been doing research into the probability of achieving high scores. Looks like we need someone who has greater than GCSE maths to explain this, so I will turn it over to you, Ian Hardingham.
Yes, what a great opportunity to say that I have half a degree in maths from the Oxford University. Thank you for allowing me to put that into the conversation completely naturally. Right, here we go. This is pretty interesting. So these graphs, this is obviously not a visual medium, this podcast. So I'm just going to have to describe to you. Basically, you can just imagine playing your favourite score attack game, be it Tetris or Nuclear Throne. Nuclear Throne's still my one of choice at the moment. Every time you turn on and play a game, how likely are you to get your highest score? Now, even said GCSE mathematician, Paul Taylor, can probably understand that as you get a higher and higher top score, it's harder to beat it.
Yes.
But also, the idea should be that you're getting better at the game over time. And how much does that cancel it out? Well, these guys did some research on simulated data, which seemed complete nonsense to me. But they did actually look at real data from 2 mobile games, which were Drop 7, which I remember, but I can't remember playing, and Cannabolt, which is an endless runner, isn't it?
Yeah,
these are both reasonably skill-based games. I was sort of just waiting for them to say it's like Clash of Clans or something, which would have undermined everything. But I think these are both reasonably skill-based games. And what this article, or paper rather, is sort of basically saying is that you sort of plateau with your skill after a while. And that means that you're much, much less likely to get a high score as time goes on because, you've got a really high score when you were having a fantastic day 2 months ago, and beating that's really hard. And that's interesting, and that's fair. I like this research. I would like to see this done for lots of different games. And this really is a good way of showing how the skill curve works. I'd like to know how this works with Nuclear Throne and Spelunky. My experience with those games is that getting to a new distance or a new high score on them is pretty rare, but I have to have been playing for a certain amount of time before I have any chance of doing something like beating hell on Spelunky, looping once on Nuclear Throne. Like, I don't even have a chance of doing that until I've been playing the game for 6 months. So, yeah, for those mathematically inclined, this is quite interesting.
This seems to be some of that research that sort of proves some intuitive knowledge already. You know, it's kind of, it just backs up what you would expect. There's nothing unexpected here, I don't think. One of the things that interests me is that how much of this is sort of consciously designed into these games, like that you are playing a game for a while initially and then you keep winning, and then it gets to the point where you have to make this big decision about investing in the game more in order to win more, or you kind of, as you say, plateau and you basically give up the game. It seems to be like a traditional game design thing. I mean, I guess some F2P games will have, they'll force you to persevere for a really long time, but it's interesting.
I mean, I think that the possibility of getting a high score is what drives you to keep playing these games, but you do not have to get a high score to have a good time. So I think it's super important that these things leave the possibility of getting an even better score, and they don't undermine that in any way. But it doesn't matter if you very rarely get one, because you're obviously also having a good time. Like, as I continue to play Nuclear Throne, I'm exploring new build types, etc. It's just a nice passing of the time, and you can be scoring yourselves on other aspects than the actual score or the distance you get, certain kind of things that you want to achieve and everything. So I'm not sure it undermines the game particularly. The only surprising thing about this data is, certainly for Cannabolt and Drop 7, it's displaying an extremely flat skill curve after having played about 30 games, which is a bit surprising. I mean, I would have thought it would require 200 or 300 games to really hit the plateau of a well-designed score attack game. So,
I mean, I guess the early experiences with those games are sort of what it's all about, though. I mean, I guess if you're still on board at that point, you then want a hard challenge, I guess. Although some of it may sort of be unconsciously designed that way. I don't think that many designers necessarily play their games to that point. Although some do. Well, that's an interesting point, actually. It reminds me that Terry Kavanagh was one of the best Super Hexagon players in the world for quite a while after he released Super Hexagon, and it's interesting to see a game designed by someone who can be that obsessed with it. I think it really affected the design of the game.
Yeah, it is. I mean, certainly I want to be able to really enjoy playing the games that I'm making, and part of that for me is allowing a certain kind of skill curve. I'm pretty good at Cortex. I'm not as good as at FS, but I'm decent at FS. Yes.
The BBC had a report about Edinburgh-based CloudGin, whose technology will be used to provide cloud-based rendering for Crackdown 3. A quote from the article said, "If we call it cloud gaming, then people will think of OnLive, and it won't really help our reputation. Is the cloud just vaporware?"
Do you remember that Microsoft made like a semi-big deal about using the cloud to offload AI processing for Xbox One?
Yes.
This is them actually doing it. I find this really bizarre. So Crackdown 3 is apparently using the cloud, I don't think for AI, but sort of for terrain deformation.
Right.
I'm completely boggled by it. Like, I think the reason that you do this is because it's a big marketing point, but no one seems to be paying any attention to this, really. I don't think people are excited by it anymore. And I just think it sounds like a complete nightmare. I don't understand... if the effect isn't purely graphical, how are you guaranteeing this service? The comparison to OnLive is sort of specious mainly, but it still has some of the problems. Like, if this is a very popular game, that could be a serious draw on Microsoft's cloud power. Although I suppose, just like Amazon, Microsoft has a lot of cloud power. What do you think of this?
I found this a bit confusing. So the developer who's being interviewed here is called Maurizio Sciglio, and he says that he's aiming for what he calls this kind of Goldilocks situation, which is where it's just right. So you get the benefit of using the cloud, you have an actual benefit, but the latency doesn't matter. So it's used for something where the latency sort of doesn't affect the gameplay too much. And obviously,
yeah, I definitely buy that. Like, yeah. I'm sure I'm fairly sure that's true.
So that's interesting to me because it's one of the first time, with OnLive, there was so much stuff about people like yourself would come out and say, speed of light problems and sort of necessary minimum latency. And they come out and go, no, it's fine. We're going to have so many data centers that's not going to be a problem. As if that was a response to that criticism. What he's done here is he's come out and said, yes, there are these issues, but there are ways in which this cloud stuff could be implemented and could be useful. And that does intrigue me, I have to say. I mean, I'm really not qualified to talk about the technical aspects of this at all. It does seem a bit ridiculous and cumbersome, as you point out, but maybe there's something to it.
Let me just quote this to make sure that everyone's on the same page about exactly what they are promising. Crackdown allows players to fire rockets into skyscrapers and watch them buckle and collapse in real time. Such detailed scene of destruction would usually overburden the console's memory and processors, meaning the picture would lag or the game itself would crash. But now it's achievable because Crackdown sends these calculations to Microsoft's Azure servers, which sends back the results within a few milliseconds. So I have no problem with the idea that would work.
Yeah.
I'm just really dubious that that's something that players want, or something that is worth the time and effort to put in. Now, you can tell me if you think I'm really off on this, but I find there's something really unsatisfying about the idea that this game I'm playing, this supposedly awesome simulated environment, has to send off to its parents to tell it about how this building fell down properly. That just feels sort of lacking in cohesion to me.
Isn't that really cool though? It needs a fucking supercomputer to calculate the physics of this building. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. I mean, that's a better way of putting it. I still find sort of problematic the idea that, again, you're writing off to this third party company that the company that tells you how your rocket's going to interact with this building. I find something about it sort of problematic, and I don't know. And I want to see Crackdown 3. I want to find out if this is giving me a fidelity of an experience that I haven't had before that's exciting enough to sell to people. I think this is a lame duck as a feature. If I take all of the data that I have into account, I think this is a lame duck of a feature. But it's possible it could be interesting.
If it can do something that you've never seen in a game before, then it's going to be worthwhile. And I
agree with that.
Very skeptical that it can, to be honest. I'm very skeptical that it can.
You have drilled down to the fundamentals of this issue. Well done.
That's it. That's right. If the physics stuff is so cool, and all this terrain deformation is, it's like the first time you saw Red Faction or something like that. If it's so far in advance of anything you can imagine, then yes, that's fine. The level of problems that this could introduce, as opposed to just doing this locally, seems astronomically high to me. there's still problems with always online games, which are now kind of normal in a lot of areas. There's still problems with those, even ones which use servers for very basic stuff. If this is going to be integral to the game, if this article talks about the game crashing, obviously it's sort of a specious article for the unwashed masses, but it talks about the game crashing. Surely this is more likely to cause disruption and crashes than doing anything else.
I'll be amazed if the actual use of it isn't pretty tertiary and they don't have a backup system for when the cloud is down, which automatically says that it's not a very important feature. And also, I'd sort of put money on this at decent odds of just not making it in. This is the kind of feature that ends up getting cut at the end if people don't think it's super, super important. So I think that at the very least it will be so sort of neutered as to be kind of uninteresting. I know this is really negative, but this really feels like, nonsense.
I'm gonna be a little bit more towards the positive than you, but incorporate sort of everything you've said as being likely. I think there is a chance that this could be great. If not great, then seriously weird. I mean, you could get some amazing looking bugs with this, just that look utterly, utterly bizarre. So that's cool. I'm all for trying stuff like this. I had previously thought that the only meaningful application of cloud stuff was to do things that were literally impossible to do in a computer in your home, and this is getting close to that. So yes, my jury is somewhat out, but they're kind of lingering outside the deliberation room, looking shiftily at the defendant.
Good. Now I need to we need to speed things up because I need to go in 10 minutes, just so you know.
Okay. Eurogamer had a report about 2 mods being developed by the Long War team for XCOM 2. Should more devs hire a cheap mod team to make official mods for their games?
Yes, every single time. This is such a great idea. Mods have kind of fallen out of favour recently, but when you get a mod team that's really respected, who obviously loves your games, you give them access to the game before it's released, you let them do something really creative with it, and you add just that little smidgen of legitimacy because you are officially sponsoring the mod. I think you get amazing results. You get a different designer's viewpoint on what's happening. You get something really cool. What a great perk for people who buy your game. I'm so 125% on board with this idea.
Yeah, this is very cool, and it's extremely smart by them. The Long War mod is probably one of the greatest mods of our time. It's very popular. It delivers a lot of stuff that people want. So instead of just trying to kind of copy that, working with the dev team is very good. Obviously, Valve have a big history of doing that as well. I'm playing at the moment the first mod I've ever got heavily involved with, which is Deus Ex Revision, and I really like it. It's really good. It does change some stuff about the game fundamentally, but I have played through Deus Ex 3 times, so I think I've had my fill of the original. It adds a lot of new art, new textures. It expands some of the areas of the levels, which is a mixed blessing, and they fix a lot of problems, as well as sort of adding some cool stuff. So it really is nice, and they give you the ability to turn on and off loads of the weirder features, so if you want a more authentic experience, you can. So I'm more pro-mod than I used to be, so I have to support this as well.
Cool, yeah.
A while back, Frontier cancelled a $100,000 Elite Dangerous tournament, citing problems with getting the required features ready in time. What do you make of this?
Everyone likes throwing big money tournaments now to get attention. I'm just kind of intrigued by this. I reckon there's smoke behind this fire, or whatever the right version of that is. Put your money where your mouth is. If you promise $100,000 and they've really upset all the people who spend a lot of time getting ready for this tournament. I'd forgotten that Elite Dangerous even had multiplayer.
Yes.
This is bad form.
Yeah, this is a really... You're kind of buying community involvement with these tournaments and then sort of take it away because you can't get the features ready. And I do believe that explanation. I think this is pretty disastrous and really needs to be kind of looked at in future in terms of how you plan these things. The other thing is that money, these big money tournaments, it's good, but it's not the main reason that people play in game tournaments. The main reason they play in them is to have a goal to work towards with, their competitive multiplayer. They want to prove that they're the best. They want to have a reason to train, a reason to practice. And so that's the thing, that taking that away from people is really bad. So it's just a sad thing. And I think devs need to be really careful when they do big money tournaments.
Yeah, boo to Frontier on this. I don't know if they're going to bring it back. Again, I'm not sure that Elite Dangerous needs an $100,000 tournament, but get it right if you're going to do it.
We're so behind the times that we need to talk about Pokemon Go. Let's do so now. So I've completely stopped playing Pokemon Go despite traveling recently, which should be the kind of optimum use case for it, where you go and you find, exciting things in new places. I was walking on my normal walk today to the supermarket where I would previously get my phone out, and I thought, thank God I don't have to faff around getting my stupid phone out. So I think the shine has come off Pokemon Go entirely for me, and I wonder if it's happening to other people.
Yes, it has. I think it took me a bit longer than you to get off it. Partially because I could just play it in my living room and catch quite a lot of Pokemon that way. I live next to a Pokestop, which is very helpful. This was an awesome phenomenon. Maybe the biggest games phenomenon we'll have for the next, 5 years. This was huge. What an amazingly cool combination of new tech and a great IP. Pokemon is still awesome, and I still really like it. I think this game... it undermined itself in terms of actually playing it for very long by sort of not tying Pokemon closely enough to places. Going to a new place in real life should be an exciting thing because you might catch like an actually new kind of Pokemon there. And that wasn't really happening. Having to have your phone out playing Pokemon, pretty embarrassing while walking, I have to say. I'm also glad I didn't have to do that. And hatching eggs would have been great if I could have done it while on my run, but because it requires you to have your phone in your hand with it turned on, I couldn't.
Yeah.
Even though I tried to hack it. So I think it really cool, kind of disposable for me. Will it spawn something great? Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I'm really down with. I wish people would stop calling it an AR game because it's not. It's a GPS game. I think more GPS games in future. People are now ready to play a game like this. They have the vocabulary to play it. That means that other developers come in and use it. I do think there's good things to be done there. I don't think this is just a fad in terms of design. I think we'll see one, big GPS game in the next few years. I think that's definitely going to happen.
Yeah.
Finally, PC Gamer are reporting that a 15-year-old unreleased Game Boy RPG has just found a home on PC. Infinity is an RPG for the Game Boy Color that was cancelled back in 2002 and has now resurfaced as a freely available ROM along with source code thanks to its developers. It's not finished, which I think is a bit of a shame, and it looks kind of amazing.
It looks really cool. I encourage everyone to look this up on the internet. I don't know if I can play this on a Vita Game Boy emulator, because that's the place that I might actually play this, if I'm allowed to do that, legally speaking. This looks really cool. We love these old RPGs,
yes,
which properly used different cells of the map to actually display the border of the screen. This looks really cool.
And there's nothing sadder than lost work, especially in game dev, because work takes so long to make. That having this kind of resurface and be playable now is great. Everything should always be playable. Right, you have to run off, I think.
I do have to run off.
Yes.
I will leave you to deal with the charts yourself.
All right. We've got a huge rush of charts and listener questions that I will do solo. So,
yes, my apologies to everyone for leaving early, but I will try not to next week.
That's fine. He has real-life responsibilities, whereas I just sit here in my house. Let's go for the games that were released this week in 2006, thanks to Eurogamer and me this week. No, producer Jimmy. Everyone other than me is busy. So for the 17th of August 2006, we have Victoria Revolutions. Now, as is customary for this feature, I haven't yet Googled anything. So let's have a look at Victoria Revolutions. Well, it seems to be some kind of empire-building game, and it's by Paradox Interactive. So kind of during the early phase of Paradox, I'm just going to see if this was well reviewed or not. It appears to have been relatively well reviewed, mostly mixed reviews. So this was sort of before they'd refined the formula, but always interesting to see their origins. Fire Department 3 on the PC. I'm completely unaware of this franchise, and it sounds absolutely amazing. Let's have a look at this. I'm going to have a look at Fire Department 3 Mission 1 playthrough on YouTube. Wow, it's got a box that says probability of fire types. It has some very untextured men running towards a big untextured door. This looks absolutely incredible. Oh, wow. And also it has a sort of vehicle strategy mode that's a bit like XCOM. This is truly amazing. I'm I think someone needs to take this aesthetic and this game design idea and make a new indie game out of it. There you go, Fire Department 3. Just raid that. We've got Pathologic on PC, which I've never played, and I really think I should. Very interesting game with a very weird aesthetic. Ice Pick Lodge, the developer, famously sort of bonkers. 2005 psychological horror, it says on Wikipedia, despite this being 2006. Oh yes, published in Europe on the 18th of August 2006 by G2 Games. Yeah, really, really interesting game, very intriguing. Do look this up and find it on YouTube if you haven't seen it before. Really fascinating. We've got Premier Manager 2006-7 on PlayStation 2 and PC. Pro Stroke Golf World Tour 2007 on PS2, Xbox and PC. Specnaz Project Wolf, which is perhaps my favourite named game. Specnaz Project Wolf appears to be a military FPS, which sort of looks a tiny bit like Delta Force. If we want to go back in time there. I'm just trying to find anything useful. Here is the Metacritic for Specnaz Project Wolf. And it didn't get enough scores to be on Metacritic. This first-person shooter lets players assume the role of a Russian Special Forces soldier. At your side is a military-trained wolf. Hang on a minute. Which can aid in your battles for at least 60% of the game? A military-trained wolf? I mean, there's so many things about that which are fantastic. I think every game should give you a military-trained wolf. Particularly Tetris. The wolf could take the shapes in its gaping mouth and then rearrange them for you. I found a YouTube video where the player gets shot and then their head just sort of clips through the terrain and their body lies outside it. Fascinating. U-Boat Battle for the Mediterranean on PC. I assume that's a U-boat simulator. That's the end of that tremendous feature, and now I sashay sassily into the present day for the top 10 UK Steam games. And at number 10, it's Just Cause 3 at 50% off. At number 9, it's Arma 3 Apex. At number 8, it's RimWorld, which I'm yet to play, and I think has a terrible name. But there we go. I've released some games with terrible names as well. Deus Ex Mankind Divided Digital Deluxe Edition at number 7. I'm going to be replaying Deus Ex Human Revolution after I finished playing the original Deus Ex with the revision mod. I'm kind of in a Deus Ex-y mood. I want to try the new one when it comes out. I think I may have been too harsh to the more recent Deus Exes. I've never played Invisible War as well, so I may try that. Empyrean Galactic Survival at number 6. Deus Ex Mankind Divided Vanilla version at number 5. Number 4 is the Mass Effect collection. Mass Effect 2 is on my list of games that I need to catch up with, and I missed back in the day, so I just ordered that for my venerable Xbox 360, and I shall be playing that. Grand Theft Auto 5 at number 2, and No Man's Sky at number 1. Excuse me while I belch quietly. That's the end of the top 10 Steam games, and now I plummet down into the appalling damp-ridden basement of the listener questions. Thank you for your questions this week. Toby Pinder asked us about No Man's Sky. I think we covered that more than adequately. Ian Terrell asked, why is Mac and Me your favourite movie of all time? I've never seen Mac and Me, although I feel like I've probably watched the majority of it thanks to various images which are tweeted at me on Twitter on a regular basis. Mac and Me it's a surprisingly good it's a surprisingly good movie for GIFs. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that I retweet them occasionally. It's quite a striking film, but not my favourite of all time. Binster asks, what is the driest robot? Mio Dragovicevic asks, as an indie developer, what changes would you like to see in written games coverage? What are the biggest issues at the moment? This is inspired by some devs struggling for coverage, while games like Overwatch and No Man's Sky get article for every tiny thing. Well, with respect to your specific question, which is basically kind of should outlets be giving more coverage to smaller games, I kind of don't feel like they should. There are certain games that appear where people are desperate for any amount of news or any announcement. If you're really into a game, I know when I was playing Overwatch a bit more, you know, a new character, a new map would have been really exciting to me. So you can't really get over that effect. In terms of changes, I still want to see journalists really looking at a design perspective alongside an aesthetic experiential perspective. This has been happening more, to be honest. When I mentioned this on Twitter, some irate journalists said, no, we are doing that, has been done. But I think a bit more awareness of game design and a bit more of a design focus could be good. But then, as we've discussed, people don't really care about that. They mostly care about the concept, the experience of the game. So that's cool. I feel like no site has really done a good job of kind of translating esports stories for an audience outside the specific community of that game. I would really love to go to a site where you can read punchily written, more accessible sort of reports about things that are going on in leagues like the GSL. Team Liquid obviously does that, but they tend to be quite sort of long-winded reports and don't really sort of distill everything down. I'd like to just get a snapshot of the StarCraft scene at the current moment. So that's the kind of journalism that I'd really like to read. Matthew S. Turvey asks, given your hatred for skips and quavers, is it unrealistic to expect FS2 to be brought to you by a proper crisp like Walker's? Well, Walker's Baked were always the prime crisp choice of Mode 7, even from back in the day. So if we're going to get a crisp sponsorship, it would be those. He says, also, more serious question that's probably been asked before, how did you come up with the title Visiting the Village? Well, we used to work in a village in Oxfordshire, and I used to go over there and visit Ian at the weekend when we were at school, and hence Visiting the Village was born. It's a very boring answer, to be honest. I've hence learned that visiting the village is a euphemism for some kind of sexual practice. But to be honest, pretty much everything we make has a name that is a euphemism for some kind of sexual practice, so I feel like that's tonally consistent. On an appropriate note, Radiant asks, the most romantic robot, I think it's Cyclonus. I'm not going to answer any questions about robot superlatives from anyone, even Binster, and no matter how many I get set, I will not answer them. So that's the end of the show. We hope you've enjoyed this. We hope you enjoyed the solo section at the end. It's always strange sitting in a room talking to myself, just musing, and knowing that at least some of you are still listening to my dulcet tones. But thank you for doing so. It's very much appreciated. You should follow us on Twitter. I'm Mode7Games, and the dearly departed one is Ian Hardingham. And we shall see you next week. Hopefully. Goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.